amigos, continuamos aquí en su programa Inclusión UANL. Estamos aquí en las instalaciones de Sintermex, muy contentos en un magno evento organizado por la Red Nacional para la Prevención de la Discapacidad, RENAPRED, y el Gobierno del Estado de Nuevo León. Y bueno, pues también nos entusiasma mucho los conferencistas, la talla internacional de quienes han estado participando en este primer Foro Mundial Prevención de la Discapacidad, RENAPRED, y hoy nos sentimos muy halagados con la presencia de un experto en el tema internacional de la discapacidad, como lo es el doctor Ashleigh Molloy. Doctor, welcome to Monterrey, welcome to this conference, RENAPRED conference. Y bueno, amigos, el doctor conoce muy a fondo el tema de la discapacidad, el tema de la educación especial y de la educación inclusiva. Dr. Ashleigh Molloy, we're very proud to have you here in Monterrey and also to meet you here at the RENAPRED conference. So we would like to ask you, what can we understand by inclusive education?
Well, it's a very new topic in terms of education, being only considered, I would say, in the last maybe 20 years. The idea is of inclusive education is to ensure the human rights are in place for every citizen. In this case, every citizen in Mexico should be able to access the school system, the tourism system, the recreation system, just like everybody else. As I say, in the Mexican Constitution, there are no citizens that are second class. Everybody is a full citizen of Mexico. So inclusion means that the rights of people to be together, to live together, and in school education, to be in the school together with the proper support so that the students can reach their full potential and be the best that they can be. So I would say, by the way, just forgot, saludos de Canada.
Right. Well, I think inclusion has to do with human rights, and that's very important for us too. But I think sometimes there are some students, because of the type of disability they have,
Severity.
The severity, yes,
as well.
Usually it's very hard for them to include in the regular system.
I can speak to that. I think we're talking about severely, critically and severely disabled. In Canada, what we do is, first of all, there has to be an infrastructure in place, Arturo. Infrastructure means what is the severity of the disability, number one. Number two, what is required to ensure that that classroom is a safe environment, not just for the student with the severe disability, but for the other staff in the school and for the other students in that classroom too. So therefore, in Canada, we have got, for example, for severely disabled students, perhaps we have got support staff. They're called educational assistants. They may be involved, for example, if there are children who need to be tube fed. So that is something that happens in the classroom. Other kids get used to the fact that these students get fed intravenously, not taking it out of mouth, number one. So that would be medical or health issues. They have to be addressed with the support people in place. In some cases, for these students, they also have a nurse that visits the school on a daily basis for that student. So it depends on the needs. That's the health aspect. The second one would be behavior. So for example, if there are students who exhibit violent behavior, then I think that's a concern, number one. Who do we have in place? And it might be gradual. So it does not necessarily mean, Arturo, that the student would be put in the classroom right away. The student, first of all, what is the plan for that student? What support do they need? So in Canada, we have got what they call CYWs, Child and Youth Care Workers. They are trained to deal with severe or violent behavior in the class. So they are aware of the triggers. The triggers. What is it in the student that they see that the student is going from a situation of yellow to red? In other words, they are trained in the psychology, the pedagogy of whatever the particular disability is. Common in students perhaps with Tourette's, with autismo, with acquired brain injury, so there are different disability categories that require, for example, behavior intervention. So again, in that case, the student might be in the school, but gradually they may be in the classroom with the regular kids for some classes, but not all classes. It would be a developmental stage to ensure that the environment is safe and that the transition is progressional, not all the time. Because when people say to me, inclusion does not work, I say, you are right. Bad inclusion does not work. So to give a teacher students with disabilities without training them to understand the children's behavior and without the support of a supportive staff of special education teacher, the support of the principal, and the support of a teaching assistant in the classroom, then it is not fair for the teacher, it's not fair for the student, and it's not fair for the school.
Because here in Mexico we have special education schools.
Yes.
And they have the most severe children with disorders, and it's difficult for us to get them in the mainstream, education. So we see this situation you have there as the educational system. You don't have special schools there, but we do have them because we are not ready yet for this transition, like the one you're talking about. I think we have to do more work in this area of professional training, and also the psychologists. I think they have a lot to do there, yes. Especially in the behavior area. And probably we need to make a thought about this, rethink this here in Mexico. And sometimes we have a confusion in what the relationship between integration, yes, and inclusion.
Well, in Canada, we were at that stage. That was part of the progression where we started thinking that integration was inclusion. But we hadn't reached inclusion. It was just simply a step in the process where we had students integrated. But what does that mean? Integration is when a student with a disability is in the classroom, but is almost by themselves, is got nothing to do with the regular program, but is physically present in the classroom. That's integration in its raw stage. The process of moving through integration is, as I said, in Canada we have a student, for example, who starts off in the subjects that are less laborious. So we wouldn't put a student in math and language perhaps, we would let them be involved with the rest of the children initially, with phys ed, with drama, with activities that aren't laborious ones such as math or language, where you have a lot of conceptual processing. So we do have that when a student comes in, for example, if it was a severe behavior concern, that would be part of the process, but with the intention of working towards the eventual goal, and that might not be a year, it might be 2 years, of ensuring that the student can participate helpfully and safely in the regular classroom. So, Mexico is on the road, but you are where we were. So you don't, it's part of the process. So like I tell my colleagues here in Mexico, don't be beating yourself up about it. You are just farther behind on the road, but you want to become part of the inclusion world. And so my being here, it gives me a great deal of honor to be able to share with my colleague in helping that process move forward. So I say Mexico is doing well because they are working towards it, and that takes time.
our special schools, they are called camps. That means
Santos, yes, I'm familiar with them. Yes,
you've been
yes.
there. Multiple attention. They refer that they can give educative attention to different disabilities at the same place. But we see other initiatives here in Monterrey of schools, for example, exclusively for autism disorder. And I would like to ask you, do you think progressive developmental disorders should be in regular school, special education schools like camps, or schools that focus exclusively in autistic disorders?
Well, being an inclusionist, I don't believe in any sort of segregation. So therefore, the challenge that we have sometimes in Canada is parents, under the law of the Education Act, clearly states that they are the final decision makers in where their child goes. So therefore, they might decide within a school, a regular school, I would like my child to be in a segregated setting. That is to say, working with a special education teacher in a separate classroom that's in the school with all the other classes, but they don't do a lot of interaction. Now, the parents see this quite understandably as protecting their children, and they believe that there's more attention, the teacher would understand, and they're with kids the same. The problem with that, Arturo, is that how do they learn anything different when they are with children who have the same challenges in learning? So, for example, to stick 6 children with severe behavioral needs in a classroom together, who are their role models but each other? So they learn to continue to duplicate bad behavior. They're not getting any role models. So, but I think the challenge is that parents are worried, parents are concerned, and I can identify with that because I, by the way, if you did not know, I have a daughter, and my youngest child was born with syndrome Down. So I understand as a parent how parents feel reluctant to let their child go into the world when they can protect them. But I try to explain to them that they should have their child be part and proud to be part of Mexican society as a full-fledged Mexican citizen. And if they are not out and given an opportunity to be with other people, when they finish school, do they stay in a segregated campo for the rest of their life? Is that really what we want for them? You know, so, but you have to be gentle with parents. I have a bit of an advantage because when they see me, they're talking to a parent of a child with a disability, so I think that they know that I'm thinking of them and I understand where they're coming from. So I think that that's the challenge right now, and it is part of the culture of Mexico, and that is an area that with inclusion and conferences like Universidad, we are moving towards helping parents to understand that things are different.
Talking with Dr. Ashleigh Molloy, estamos hablando con el Dr. Ashleigh Molloy sobre estos temas tan interesantes de inclusión educativa e integración escolar con niños y niñas con discapacidad. Estamos de regreso en las instalaciones de Sintermex en este magno evento de RENAPRED, la Red Nacional para la Prevención de la Discapacidad, que ha organizado este primer foro mundial de prevención de la discapacidad con un programa muy interesante donde han acudido expertos en el área digamos de la prevención desde el punto de vista de la salud de la discapacidad y también lo que es el tema de la inclusión educativa, que es lo que estamos abordando. Por este motivo hemos invitado a una de las ponentes, a la doctora Forlin. Ella es una experta, una consultora internacional experta en temas de inclusión ha trabajado con organismos internacionales, tiene una amplia trayectoria de investigación y académica en esta área. De tal manera que me voy a permitir llevar a cabo una serie de preguntas y una entrevista con la doctora Forlin sobre la situación de la educación inclusiva en su país y aquí cómo lo concibe aquí en México. Dr. Forlin, welcome here to Monterrey, to this RENAPRED conference, and we are very proud to have you here. And I would like to begin this interview asking you, what can we understand by inclusive education?
What a big question. That's a good one to start with, a big question, isn't it?
Right.
Inclusive education, it's really hard to define exactly what it means because it depends very much on the context in which you are looking. I do a lot of international work, and everywhere I go, inclusive education is different. It's the way you conceptualize it and the way you define it depends very much on the area in which you are working, the type of schools that you have, the children that you are catering for their needs for, and the process of education that the school is going through at a particular time. So inclusive education, basically, it's the right of all children to be included in a regular school to receive an education that's appropriate to their needs. That's sort of the bottom line for inclusive education. But how that actually happens, how we operationalise that, will depend very much on where you are. If you are in a very poor area where schools could just be a tree that you sit under, the teacher may or may not have any training, inclusive education can be quite different in that situation, which might just mean all the children coming together and learning together. But if you go to a more wealthy country, for example, like Australia, where I come from, we would expect children to be in formal schooling and in schools where there's a lot of support, a lot of resources and a lot of facilities. And inclusive education there may still be including the children in the regular classroom, but may also be providing support teachers, providing occupational therapists, speech therapists, physiotherapists, psychologists to help the regular teacher provide specifically for the needs of individual children.
Sometimes we think that what will happen with special education teachers in this movement of
That's a very good question. When we first started to talk about what was then called integrated education about 30 years ago, all special school teachers were really worried they were going to lose their jobs. We've been working in this area for a long time. How are we going to survive? And this is, I think, a real concern. I think the whole idea of fear of the unknown is really important here. And this is why opportunities like this conference, this congress that we've got here, to discuss about what it is we're talking about and to share ideas, help teachers, community members, children overcome their fears about what we're talking about. No, it doesn't mean that special school teachers are going to lose their job, but what it might mean is that their role will change. Where they have been originally working one-on-one or with a small group of students with special needs, their role may become more supportive. In many countries, the role of the special education teacher now is not to work directly with the children, but to work with the teachers and to support the teacher in modifying their curriculum, looking at their pedagogy that they use to cater for the children. So the special school teacher has to have different skills to work with the regular school teacher to support the children in their class. So that's one of the main ways the role has changed. But most countries still keep special schools and regular schools as separate entities. I think countries where they're bringing these closer together, where even if a child is not included full-time in the regular class, they have opportunities to all be part of the same school, is very important.
Right. And I think one of the issues here is how can we prepare teachers for inclusive education? You talk about professional learning. Can you talk us about that? a little bit more.
Yeah, well, this is of course the big issue. If we ask people to do something that we don't train them in how to do it, how on earth can we expect them to do it properly? I think there's two types of teacher preparation. One, of course, is pre-service teacher preparation, which is our students who are going through university training. We need to ensure that inclusive education is part of their curriculum. Now, this could either be in two ways. It could be as a standalone course, where they do 10 weeks, maybe 3 hours a week, learning more about inclusive education. Or it could be an infused model where every curriculum that they go to, geography, history, maths, science, English, all includes talking about how you cater for children with special educational needs in those particular curriculum areas. I think we need both. I think you need a standalone course which can give the background about inclusive education. But I also think you need to have it infused across all curriculum areas. Otherwise it's seen as special, it's seen as different, and until we come together that's not going to happen. Three things that I use as the foundation for all of my pre-service and in-service teacher training and working with teachers in the field is that they need three things in these three broad areas. And we tend to talk about needing what we call the head, the hands and the heart. Now the head is having the knowledge. They need to have the knowledge, the understanding. They need to know how to be able to include students with special needs in regular classes. So without the knowledge, it's very difficult to do that. They need to have the hands, which is the practice. They need to be able to translate this knowledge into practice. And there's always a big talk about the knowledge-practice gap. That's a big issue. Basically, they need the heart. If they don't want to become inclusive, if they don't have an attitude which is an inclusive attitude, then it doesn't matter how much knowledge they've got or how good a teacher they are, they won't include the students. So teacher education and teacher professional learning needs to focus on those three areas, and all of them are needed if a teacher's going to be able to be prepared for inclusive education.
We need to transform the schools, to change schools, and we're talking here about the cultural aspects of the organization. And what do you think should be the way we should begin transforming these schools? Because we have read about the inclusive index, like a system to transform schools. But I would like to ask you, how do you perceive the leadership in schools? How can we work with the principals and with the teachers as leaders to transform schools?
And I think that's a really important aspect. I'm delighted that you're talking about transforming schools and not just putting inclusive education into it, because it does require schools to be completely different from what they were before. Most of the systems where I work, they have a two-pronged approach. The first is they upskill their leaders, and all the research shows that the role of the principal in leading inclusive education is absolutely critical. If the principal doesn't understand the concept of inclusive education and doesn't know what's required and doesn't have that understanding, that heart that they want to move it forward, it's very hard to move inclusive education into a school. So when I was working in Hong Kong, which is where I spent 10 years, we did a lot of work with the principals there, running seminars, running workshops, running interactive dialogues with them to get them an understanding of what it means to lead an inclusive school. So that's one aspect. But at the same time, you still need to train your teachers. And we ran a series of workshops for the teachers. We offered a lot of university training where they could come and do short courses on basic understanding about inclusive education and then more advanced understanding about inclusive education. And this was done in collaboration with the government. The government funded a lot of the training because it requires funding to cover the cost of the training, but it was done with the government and with a variety of other NGOs to provide that support to enable that to happen. I think the key thing is you need to start talking about this is what you want to do, and obviously you are doing that and have been doing that for a while, because this is my third visit to Mexico, and every time I've come there's a very big movement towards inclusive education. Something like using the index for inclusion is a good way of going. It's quite time consuming, and it needs opportunity for teachers and the principal to sit down and spend time together. If you can arrange that, then I think it's absolutely an excellent way of learning. But there are other things you need to do as well. You need to bring the principals together. You need to get them talking and discussing and understanding what it means, and then you need to bring the teachers together. But then when they've both got their training in the school itself, you have to develop a culture of inclusive education, and that means everybody having a vision of what this is going to mean for their school. So the first thing you do in the school is develop a vision. Our vision is, and how will we know whether we've achieved this vision? We will know this by this, this, and this. And then everybody in the whole school should be focused on achieving that vision.
You talk about indicators of inclusion. Is this part of these indicators the mission? They know the mission, the vision of the school. What other indicators do you think are very relevant to so we can think that the school is inclusive?
Now this is something that you probably heard that we're doing a very large project at the moment on developing indicators for inclusion, and this is working with 14 countries in the Asia Pacific region, and they have all got together and they have developed a vision for all of the countries, and part of that vision is to develop inclusive education. As a way forward with that, they said, how will we know if we are improving inclusive education? Very big question, how do you know we're getting there? So we are working with them to develop a series of indicators that are contextually appropriate for their countries in the Pacific Islands. So when you are looking at, for example, Mexico, wanting to develop a set of indicators, you need to do that in Mexico. You need to get together, you need to talk about what it is that you want to do, you need to identify the different areas. In our indicators we have got 12 different dimensions, and under each of those dimensions are a number of specific indicators that look at does the country have a policy on inclusive education? Is that policy enacted at a regional and a school level? Does a school have a policy on inclusive education? How many children with disabilities are included in their local school? And types of indicators that relate to different aspects of inclusive education.
Seguimos con la doctora Chris Forlin. En un momento regresamos aquí. Y regresamos con el doctor Ashleigh Molloy, y bueno, pues estamos hablando precisamente de estos retos que tiene la educación especial a la luz de la educación inclusiva. Y bueno, pues el doctor Ashleigh Molloy nos ha estado detallando qué es la experiencia que ellos han tenido en Canadá. Nos comenta que estamos en ese camino, porque la inclusión es un proceso y bueno, hay que ir avanzando poco a poco en el mismo. Doctor Ashleigh Molloy, what do you think is the future of special education in the light of inclusive education?
I think that special education will no longer become special education. It will be blended into a team approach where the special educator and the general or subject educator will be working together harmoniously and without any sort of difference. So for example, the service will be delivered to the children in the classroom by the special educator in concert and in partnership with the classroom teacher. So I see special education and general education as being one. I don't see it as going to a separate room. I just see the special educator as being a subject specialist in helping the teacher to adapt the curriculum, design the program so that the child is able to access that curriculum given his or her special learning challenge.
We need to develop a lot of collaborative work between regular teachers and regular special
Very much.
I think that's one point that we have to develop.
I think that right now, like teachers are there, and they believe that they are there to teach all children. So therefore, teachers who have not had special education training, I think it's very important that that is provided for them, because all teachers teach special education because they don't just know it. Because within your students of 20 students, it's not just the identified disabilities that are special education. Everybody has learning challenges. For example, if I didn't have you with your translation in English, I would be challenged because my Spanish is not only un poquito. So we all need support to open ourselves to experiences. So I just see special education as becoming just part of a specialty within the mainstream frame of education, and that's what it should be. Seamless education.
Sí, amigos y amigas de Inclusión Educativa UANL, pues estamos de regreso en esta interesante entrevista con la doctora Chris Forlin. Ella es australiana, una experta en el tema de la inclusión a nivel internacional, y bueno, también conoce otros sistemas educativos, en el caso de Hong Kong, donde ha trabajado también como docente, investigadora. Y bueno, pues vamos a continuar esta charla con la doctora Chris Forlin. Dr. Chris Forlin, we were talking about indicators, and you were telling us about the dimensions of these indicators. Can you tell us more about these aspects?
Well, the dimensions relate to a whole range of aspects. For example, we've ended up with 12 dimensions. We started off with a very large number of dimensions, but we've tried to get them nice and succinct and focused. If you have too many indicators, it's not manageable. These dimensions, some of them, for example, relate to policy. So does the school have, does the country have a policy about inclusive education? Does a district and a school have a policy about inclusive education? Others relate to the number of children who are included in regular schools. We're trying to measure whether more children with disabilities are being included in regular schools. So we keep a record of data which is disaggregated according to maybe gender, or according to the area in which they live, or whether the disability, the type of disability that they have, so that the government has a good idea as to how they are progressing towards inclusive education.
What is your experience? How do you see comparatively the difference between inclusive education in Australia and in Hong Kong, for example? Do you see many differences or significant differences?
Yes. I think when you look at any two countries, there's always lots of differences. There's lots of similarities too. And I think I'll start with the similarities. The main thing that you see as a similarity is that all teachers are very dedicated and supportive of catering to the needs of their children. What you see in Australia is a country which has been inclusive for many years, and we've had a transition from special schools to more and more students being included in regular schools. We have closed a lot of our special schools, but we still contain a continuum. So we still have special schools, we have units on site of regular schools and regular schools. In Hong Kong, it was in 1997 when they started to talk about and put up their first policy on inclusive education, but it was a very slow transition. It's something which is quite new for people in Hong Kong and China, and it's been a fairly slow progress to get this happening. And it's only probably in about the last 5 or 6 years that we've seen a big move towards inclusive education there. Whereas in Australia, we've been moving towards integrated education, inclusive education, for probably more than 30 years. So when you look to see what's happening, you've got the same passion in both of the countries, but you've got more inclusive practices visible in Australia, and they are now developing in Hong Kong.
Okay. Well, I think the cultural aspects of both countries are very relevant to this process in inclusive education. Also, I don't know if you have opinions about how do you see inclusive education in America, in Latin America, and Mexico. Could you tell us about what's your conception about how is this process going on here in our countries?
Well, I wouldn't like to comment too much on what you're doing here other than what I've seen. Now, I've been to Mexico. This is my third visit to Mexico, and I've been very lucky to go and visit schools while I've been here. I've been to visit completely segregated special schools, and I've been to visit inclusive schools. And I think what I see here, probably even more than in many other countries, is the passion that people have for inclusive education. They are so focused on providing the best they can for all children. So when I go to special schools, it's a vibrant, engaging school. The curriculum is exciting. The teachers are working so hard to cater for the needs of all children there. And there's a very close link with parents as well, which I think is extremely positive. When I go to the regular schools, there's not quite as much inclusion going on as I've seen in some other countries, but they are just as passionate about supporting the learners that they do have with disabilities and with other special needs in their classes. So I think that you are here on the cusp of becoming very inclusive, but you still have this whole issue of how do we look at our special schools and our regular schools? How do we develop that continuum of movement from special schools to regular schools? But I think you're taking the wise decision of not just closing all special schools without ensuring that there is support and appropriate curriculum for children who are being moved into regular schools, and that your special school teachers are able to support the regular school teachers in the types of differentiation and accommodations that these students might need. So it seems an exciting time here in Mexico. It's lovely to visit the schools and to see so much happening here.
I think we have the heart there.
You certainly have the heart, and you have the hands, and you are getting the knowledge, I think, about how to move this forward and asking the right questions.
Dr. Ashleigh Molloy, thank you very much for this interview. We're very proud to have you here at again, and we hope to see you soon here in Monterrey.
Well, I will say, conclude by Viva la Educación Inclusiva, and Viva Mexico, and Viva Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León. Muchas gracias.
Y viva Canadá también. Muchas gracias, doctor Ashleigh Molloy.